lifted their feet and walked. When they went somewhere, when they put one foot in front of the other, it was a conscious act with a purpose. When they lifted their eyes and looked at something, they were intentionally looking and trying to see. So if every action is governed by a Torah principle, you can learn more from the conversation than you can from actual law that is being taught by later generations. The conscious, intellectual conversations, the things that are taught to us, we might have even a broader and deeper understanding from the incidental, the narratives that are taught by those people of earlier generations. So, getting back to our Mishkan, so I don't know if it's a good analogy or not, but Torah is teaching us that there is what does it mean that the conversation of the servant is more precious than the law taught to the children? Obviously, we need the information. The Torah is here to impart information that's meaningful, and the Torah has to tell us enough so that we are able to get all of the insight that we need. And the Torah doesn't tell us anything extra that's redundant. But we see from Chazal that it's more than that. Part of the message is not just quantity but quality. The Torah devotes more time to a conversation, not just because it's meaningful, because it's yafa, it's more precious. Meaning, there's a message there too, not just that there are a lot of nuances in this conversation. Clearly, there are a lot of nuances in the halachic material as well, and the Torah couldn't afford, so to speak, to leave any of it out. Nor would the Torah want to teach us things that are redundant. But it's all about the presentation. The Torah, so to speak, again, we can't really use these terms to something in a literal sense. But the Torah, in a certain sense, has a choice. You can be more terse and leave more to the student to dig out. You can be more lengthy and spell it out more. The decision to expand on the narrative of Eliezer and to shorten some of the later sections is an illustration of the quality and the value that we attach to those earlier conversations. And in that vein, I guess, we could do an analogy to these parashas where the Torah can choose to convey information in a very brief, abbreviated form, or lengthier and more detailed form. And the choice of telling it to us in a lengthy form tells us something about how the Torah feels, so to speak. And we can't describe human feelings to Hashem. So the Torah is a book written by Hashem, but we relate to Hashem as if we use human terms, we use human emotions to describe the way we experience Hashem's presence. And when Hashem speaks about something a lot, we say, wow, Hashem is really into this. This must mean a lot to him. He's speaking about it so much. That's something that we can take away from this, that the house that we built, now you can imagine that you build something for a loved one and you just admiring it and marveling over it and looking at the dimensions and snapping pictures because it's so beautiful. Okay, the Venu Bach in his introduction to the parsha brings a verse from Mishlei, from the Proverbs of Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech said the following: "Achol b'ni devash ki tov v'nofes masog al chikecha." Eat honey, my son; it's good, sweet to your palate. In that manner, I guess, metaphorically speaking, it's not really about honey. It says your soul should know wisdom. If you found it, you'll have a future. Your hope shall never be cut off. Okay. So what is this about? He explains there's an analogy here between wisdom, which brings pleasure to the mind, compared to honey, which brings pleasure to the body. this is the basic, we call the MO, the method of operation, the way the word Proverbs is written. There's a reason it's called Proverbs, because it's full of Proverbs. He says, Proverbs are a way for the mind to educate the body. He calls it the nature, mind versus nature, or maybe you would call it instinct. A person has a mind and a person has instinct. The only way for the mind to communicate and to correct or direct the nature is using a parable. A parable really means something that speaks in the language of the thing. Later, centuries later, the Muslim movement would use the same idea and say, we know certain things, and yet that knowledge remains stuck in our intellect and doesn't guide our actions. Like, we know why we shouldn't lose our temper. We know why we should be humble. We know why it's important to be honest, and yet we don't always act in line with our beliefs. The solution is to try to educate the part of us that isn't getting the message. It's not our mind that isn't getting the message, it's our heart. It's our instincts and our emotions. So we use imagery and we use other techniques to make the information not just knowledge, but to make it a felt experience. And that's one of the core aspects of the Musar movement. So he goes on to say that creations in existence have four levels. This is classic system of thought used in the Middle Ages by many of the authors. Inanimate objects, plants, living creatures, and those that speak. Right? Those that speak, of course, means human beings, as opposed to all other living creatures. He says, starting with the inanimate objects, mountains, hills, they have no soul at all. They're just objects. Plants have, because a soul that grows or that sprouts. They have a life force. They grow. I believe they perform the 8 life functions that I was taught in biology class. It makes them living creatures. We talk about plants being alive. The next level are animals, which have the soul of movement. So that makes sense. The difference is, if a plant performs the 8 life functions, why is a tree different from a bear? Because the bear can walk around and the tree can't. So above that comes the human being, who's the speaker, the one that has the power of speech. And the intelligence that man has is really what gives him the advantage over all the other forms of existence. Creation, too, that came about in that manner. First, the dry land was seen, then plants, then crawling creatures, flying creatures, and finally, man was created last of all, because it goes from least sophisticated to the most prominent. So he says, he goes on to say that man is created with a superior intellect, but he also shares the aspects of the lower life forms. He has the same kind of soul that the animal has and the plant has, but he has the additional advantage of the intelligent soul. Therefore, he says man has a choice of which part of him he wants to give primacy to. So if he allows the intelligence to take control, he becomes like an angel. If he allows the lower natures to take control, he becomes like an animal. We're always being warned to make sure that we live up to our potential, not to be like the animals, because we are capable of doing that. We're capable of obeying natural instincts and ignoring the directions of the intellect, and then we don't end up being what human beings are designed to become. And Shlomo explains to us in the book of Proverbs. He uses many illustrations to show the advantages of following intellect and the harm that comes just following our instincts. He says, instincts, nature, will not only fall short and be too lazy to pursue spiritual things, a person who acts on instinct won't even properly pursue their physical needs, food, clothing, shelter. It's the intellect that really shows a person the need to plan ahead and to prepare to get their needs met. Um, it's the intellect that says, well, you may have food in your pantry now, but if you don't restock, you're going to go hungry. If you don't earn some money, you won't be able to buy clothing. If you don't pay the rent, you won't have a place to live. So it's really the intellect that guides a person to do all these things. Nature, if left to its own devices, a person, if he wants something, he'll steal it, cheat, take what he wants. These things, again, they seem attractive at the time. In the short term, they appeal to the instincts, which want gratification in the moment. I need something right now. I want something right now. And intellect says it's not a good idea. You'll ultimately will come to shame in this world, come to judgment in the next world. And so take the long view and choose more wisely. Don't do something that might be attractive in the moment, but damaging in the long run. Nature wants to enjoy, have a good time, have fun. Wants to gratify its desires and pleasures of the moment. Intellect says these are perhaps pleasurable activities in the short run, but ultimately bitter in the long run. So there's the intelligent part of the person wants to educate the nature and the instincts to behave in ways that are less self-defeating, right, and are beneficial in the long run. So there are certain things that nature can recognize. Even an animal without intellect at all, will run away from a fire. Right? That's something that doesn't require projection in the long term. That's an immediate danger and can cause immediate pain. Or, it will avoid falling into deep water if you can see the water in front of it. A loud noise will also scare the animal. So the intelligent part of the person can educate the lower nature and say, if you see something bad, if you see a sin, if you see something dishonest, something that is unkind, you should run away from that. You hear something that's inappropriate, gossip, other kinds of negative speech, you should view that as a danger. So look, you run away from fire, you run away from the edge of a cliff, you run away from a deep raging river, and that's why, again, Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, uses all these metaphors. And he'll compare in a positive way. For trust in Hashem is like a mighty tower. You see an enemy, a hostile army, in a powerful fortress with high walls and strong towers. You say, wow, that's impressive. So someone tells you trust in Hashem, that's your fortress. Thing which we see and we relate to and we instinctively respond to, and it's an image which resonates with us. He talks about stealing and he compares it to birds caught in a trap. They see some bird seeds, some grains, they fly down to peck at the grains, and the next thing they know, they're trapped in a net. So he says that's what stealing is. You see a few coins, you want to make a few bucks, and the next thing you know, you're stuck in big trouble. And he says, spilling the beans but revealing secrets. It's like a city without a wall. A city has no wall; it's unprotected. So a person whose mouth doesn't have safeguards, they'll blurt anything out. It's the same thing. So all of these are images that he uses, and we could use the same technique. It's a technique that, again, was advised throughout the centuries, received modern updates, but it's the same idea. It's the idea that our mind understands information, but the other parts of us understand seeing, hearing, feeling, and we use The idea of using a mashal, we call a parable, a metaphor, a fable, any term you want, all these things turn abstract knowledge into a concrete reality. And they say that, person, I think I can relate to at least this much. I have a little bit of a fear of heights, not not a phobia, but I get nervous when I'm at the edge of a tall building, as many people do. And if I think and visualize a really tall height, I can feel a little bit of a shiver, a little bit of sweating. Nothing huge, but I believe scientifically they say that a person really could relive in their imagination or visualize an actual event and have the same physical reactions that they would have if they were experiencing in real life. People have flashbacks, extreme situations, but in general, the idea that really everything we experience is because a person sees a truck coming towards them. What if it's not a real truck? What if it's just virtual reality? But it looks like a truck, so we react a certain way. If I think I see a truck coming towards me, I'm going to react the same way. I'm reacting not whether there's a truck there that matters. It's whether I think there's a truck there. So, there's a story of Vashti, King Ahasuerus summoned her at the beginning of the story of Megillas Esther. Ahasuerus summoned Vashti. She wouldn't come. He got rid of her, and Esther became the new queen. So why did Vashti not come? The Gemara says famously that she was finally going to give in and show up, but then she noticed that she had broken out in pimples and she had some kind of growth that looked like a tail coming out of her. It was a divine punishment. So some said, one Midrash says it wasn't actually there, but an angel made her imagine it was there. It was like a hallucination or it was a delusion. And, it's striking, it's poignant, but it doesn't really matter, right? At the end of the day, whether she actually has pimples or she thinks she has pimples, it's the same thing. It makes no difference. So, if the rabbis tell us you do this mitzvah, you'll go to heaven and you'll enjoy the incredible pleasure of Hashem's presence, we know it's a reality, just that our brain knows and our body doesn't. If we can visualize, that's a hard thing to visualize, but if we can visualize it, then we're actually taking a truth and just imagining it and making it more real. It doesn't. It's not something. It's something that we do naturally without even thinking about it. If I tell you I'm going to buy you a can of Coke, you can already imagine how it's going to taste before I buy it for you. I come back 5 minutes later with a Coke, you're not surprised. This is not something we've experienced, so we kind of think of it as abstract, but imagine if it were as real to us as a can of Coke, we'd always do the right things. We'd always do the mitzvahs. We would never do the wrong thing because we would imagine correctly what it's going to be like. So even if we've never experienced the consequences of good deeds and bad deeds, but whatever inkling that we have based on the Torah of what those consequences will be like, the more we visualize them, the more we'll be like, oh, well, if I do this, then, I'll get something that I like. And if I do that, I'll get something that I don't like. And the more real those concepts are to us, the more likely we are to reflect that in our behavior. So, this is kind of a lengthy piece. Too much to go through the entire thing. But he goes on to say that when Shlomo speaks in terms of wisdom, he says, just as honey is good and sweet for the body, so too wisdom is something beneficial and sweet for the soul. Again, he was using the same technique, and he was saying, even the lower parts of our intellect and the more instinctive parts of our nature understand that honey is sweet and sweet things are good. We all like that. That's one of the most simple and basic drives that we have, is to eat foods that are tasty and that are sweet. And he says, if we can make an association in our mind of wisdom, that wisdom is sweet. And that was an old ancient custom. I don't know if it even existed yet at the time that this was written, hundreds of years ago, but it was certainly a custom in Europe. When a child would first go to the cheder to study the alphabet, they would spread some honey on the letters, and the child would taste the honey, and that would send the message that learning is sweet, that learning Torah is sweet. And that's really what Shlomo Melech was writing thousands of years ago. That you should make an association, even if you didn't have the privilege of that particular custom. I actually didn't, but you can do it now. You can, in your mind, think about something that's sweet. As a matter of fact, we do this. Everyone does it at the end when we finish, when we complete a section of Torah study. We make a siyum, we celebrate, and part of it is that same idea. We want to create, we want to send a message. Advertisers know this very well. When we celebrate something and we link it with parties, we link it with honor, we make it glorious, creates in the person's mind an association. So you put a nice-looking person next to a car, people think that the car is associated with nice-looking people. They don't even think it. They instinctively link it in their minds. It goes beyond logic. It precedes logic. And the more we can do things that in our mind cause wisdom and cause the learning of Torah to be associated with things that are good and cool and fun and sweet, nice and honorable and glorious, the more we will embrace Torah study, not just with our minds, which are relatively limited, have a limited role in the decision-making process, but also with our instinct, with our gut, which has a major role in the decision-making process, perhaps the most major role of all. So what does all this have to do with the parsha? So at the end, he links it. It's a valuable piece in and of itself, obviously, and that's why he has this lengthy essay. But he always, introductions always lead into the portion of the week. What he says, the story of the sixth parsha, that the creation of the Mishkan, is part of the narrative and the progression of events that began with the Jews standing at Har Sinai and on Sinai getting the Torah, Moshe going up to the mountain, Moshe coming down from the mountain, the golden calf, going back up the mountain, and eventually coming down the mountain with the commandments to build the Mishkan. So we find the Torah describes that process. It says, Vayakhel right? It says that not just Moshe Rabbeinu, but the elders, the different levels, the hierarchy of the Jewish people. Some people were allowed to go closer to the mountain. Everyone had to stand back beyond certain boundaries, but some of the elite were allowed to go forward. Aaron's sons and some of the elders. It says they saw Hashem's presence and they ate and they drank. So this is metaphoric, but what it means is that the revelation that they experienced, the particular revelation that these people who are on a higher level got to experience, was as enjoyable as eating and drinking. That's for the Targum. Uncle says it in Aramaic, that the enjoyment they had of a spiritual nature was this as, I guess, kind of as real and concrete as the physical enjoyment that one has from eating good food. And we also find that Moshe stayed up for 40 days and 40 nights learning the Torah and didn't eat and drink. So how is that? Because his soul received pleasure and nourishment from that experience, that spiritual experience of studying the Torah, that gave sustenance to his body as well. Just as what usually happens is that we eat physical food that sustains not only the body but the soul. Moshe had a spiritual experience that sustained not only the soul but the body. I've heard, I don't know the source for this, but I've heard that the Vilna Gaon, they say, was not a slim person. He was substantial physically, and it wasn't because he ate a lot, but it was because his Torah study was so intense that nourished his body. I didn't understand this story, but this seems to me almost explicitly what Rabbeinu Malki is saying about Moshe Rabbeinu. And then he goes through the progression of the dates and how the experience of Moshe, which actually lasted for 120 days because he went up the mountain 3 times. And then the
Well, hello. I think. Hey, guess who's on?